The second Ryan shoved me into the kitchen counter, the edge caught me just below the ribs. My coffee mug hit the tile and broke into 3 pieces. He looked down at me and said, "Don't make this worse." That was when I reached for my phone. I didn't call 911. Not yet. I opened the old text thread labeled Dad and typed 3 words he'd taught me years ago. "Need you now." Then I hit send. My name is Emily Carter. I was 46 that winter, an Army logistics officer assigned to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Ryan and I lived across the state line in Clarksville, Tennessee, in one of those newer subdivisions where every driveway had a pickup truck, a basketball hoop, or both. From the outside, we looked steady, respectable even. Ryan worked as a regional operations manager for a private security company in Nashville. He wore pressed khakis, carried 2 phones, and liked telling people he was in executive leadership, even though most of his job involved scheduling guards and arguing over mileage reports. I had spent 22 years in uniform. I knew how to manage a crisis, move supplies through a storm, keep 30 tired soldiers focused when nothing was going right. At home, though, I'd become skilled at making excuses. He's under pressure. He didn't mean it that way. He just has a temper. That night, the excuses ran out. Ryan had started drinking before dinner, 2 bourbons, then a third, while I heated leftover meatloaf. He was already angry because my father had stopped by that afternoon to replace the loose rail on our back steps. "Your dad needs to quit acting like this is his house," Ryan said. "He pokes around like some lonely old handyman." I set down the serving spoon. "His name is Jack and he was trying to help." Ryan laughed through his nose. "Jack. Right. The silent cowboy in the 20-year-old Ford." My father was 71, broad-shouldered but lean, silver at his temples, hands rough from years of work. He spoke softly, drove an old F-150, and never told stories about himself. Ryan took that quietness for weakness. He had no idea Dad had spent 26 years in the Navy, that he'd once been a SEAL. I'd never told him, because Dad had asked me not to. He didn't hide from shame. He simply believed the past belonged in the past. Ryan stepped closer. "You always choose him." "That isn't true." "It is tonight." I turned away and his hand closed around my upper arm. Hard. "Let go of me." He did, only to shove me. After I sent the text, Ryan stared at the broken mug, almost surprised at himself. 10 minutes later, 3 hard knocks shook the door. "Your old man came to rescue you," Ryan smiled. I checked the clock, 8:47 p.m., and walked toward the door. But Ryan got there first, that same smug grin on his face. "What, did your daddy leave his fishing pole here?" Another knock, steady and confident. He swung the door open. My father stood on the porch in faded jeans, a brown work jacket, the same old boots he'd worn for years, gray hair damp from a light February rain, his truck still idling in the driveway. At a glance, he looked exactly like the quiet, retired guy Ryan had mocked for years, someone who spent Saturdays fishing and Sundays fixing neighbors' fences. "Took you long enough," Ryan said. Dad didn't answer. His eyes moved past Ryan and settled on me, finding the red marks on my arm immediately. His expression didn't change. That was one thing I'd always admired about him. Even when something terrible happened, he never panicked. He simply observed. "You all right, Em?" My throat tightened. "I am now." Ryan folded his arms. "This is between my wife and me." Dad looked at him. "No, it stopped being just between the 2 of you." Ryan laughed. "Oh, please, you actually called him?" "I texted him for this." Dad glanced at the broken mug, then back at my arm. "What happened?" "I told him to let go." Dad nodded once. That was all. No shouting, no threats, no dramatic speeches, just one small nod. Ryan rolled his eyes. "You know, Jack, I never understood why Emily acts like you're some kind of hero." Dad ignored him. "I'd like Emily to grab a coat." Ryan stepped into the doorway. "She's not going anywhere." Dad stayed perfectly still. "I wasn't asking your permission." Something in his voice made even me pause. Not because it was loud, because it wasn't. I'd heard that same calm tone once when I was 19, home from college after a terrible breakup, crying so hard I could barely breathe. Dad hadn't tried to solve everything. He'd just made coffee, handed me a blanket and said, "We'll figure out tomorrow." Tomorrow. He always sounded like that. Steady. Ryan mistook that calm for weakness now too, stepping so close only a foot separated them. "You don't scare me." "I didn't come here to scare you." "Good, because you're just an old man." For a brief second, something flashed across Dad's face. Not anger, sadness. He looked at Ryan the way a disappointed teacher looks at a student who keeps making the same mistake. "You've been married to my daughter for 9 years, Dad said. You've spent every holiday telling jokes at my expense. So I let them go. So you called me useless. You are retired. You laughed at my truck. It's falling apart. You asked if I even knew how to use a smartphone." Ryan chuckled. "You barely text." "I learned." Dad reached into his jacket and held up his own phone. "I got your message, Emily." Then to me, "Did he put his hands on you?" I couldn't speak, I just nodded. Dad slipped the phone back into his pocket. Emily, sweetheart, go pack an overnight bag. Ryan barked a laugh. Or what? You have 5 minutes to decide how difficult you want tonight to become. Ryan burst out laughing. What are you going to do, beat me up? But Dad just turned toward the driveway and raised one hand. Headlights appeared around the corner. Then another set. Then another. 3 SUVs rolled to a stop along the curb. Nobody rushed out. Nobody shouted. The engines shut off one by one, leaving the neighborhood strangely silent except for a dog barking somewhere down the street. Ryan's smile began to fade. What is this? Dad answered calmly. Friends. Out stepped Mike Reynolds, a retired Montgomery County sheriff I'd known since I was a teenager, who'd coached my Little League team. Tom Alvarez, a retired Marine who now ran one of the largest private security firms in Middle Tennessee and had fished with Dad for years, and Bill and Diane Parker, old friends from a mile down the road. I'd called Uncle Bill and Aunt Diane my whole life. What is this? Ryan said. Some kind of family reunion. Nobody laughed. We came, Mike told him, because Jack said his daughter needed people she could trust. For the first time all evening, Ryan seemed unsure of himself. Dad stepped just inside the doorway, not invading the house, just wanting a better look at me. He lifted my sleeve gently. The bruises were already darkening. His jaw tightened, almost invisibly. Anywhere else? My shoulder. Did he hit your head? No. Ryan threw up his hands. I barely touched her. Mike spoke first. You might want to stop talking. I don't need legal advice. No, Mike said, but you do need common sense. Tom folded his arms. That's not what I'm looking at. Dad turned to Ryan. You've got exactly one chance to do the right thing. Ryan forced a laugh. And what's that? Emily is leaving with me tonight. No, you don't get to make that decision. This is my house. Dad looked around at the broken mug, the knocked-over chair, my untouched dinner. No, he said quietly. This is her home. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until that moment. For months, maybe years, I'd felt smaller inside my own house. Dad reminded me in a single sentence that I still belonged there. Ryan pointed at the door. Everybody get out. Dad didn't move. Emily, go upstairs. I don't want to leave you. A faint smile crossed his face. I've handled harder conversations than this. I believed him. Growing up, I'd asked countless questions about his Navy career, and he always changed the subject except once, when he told me, the loudest man in the room usually knows the least. Watching Ryan yell while my father barely raised his voice, I finally understood exactly what he meant. I came downstairs 10 minutes later with an overnight bag. Ryan was pacing. Mike stood near the door. Tom quietly swept the broken mug into a dustpan. The silence itself had become uncomfortable. As I reached the door, Ryan grabbed my suitcase. You're not leaving. Dad stepped between us, not aggressively, just enough that Ryan had to let go. I asked you one question earlier, Dad said. What? Did you think she'd always be alone? Ryan didn't answer, neither did anyone else. Then red and blue lights swept across the front windows. Officer Daniel Brooks and his partner Melissa Grant stepped onto the porch. I recognized Brooks from community events in Clarksville. Evening, ma'am. He took in the broken mug, the overturned chair, Ryan standing pale in the kitchen. Someone called about a domestic disturbance. Ryan pointed at Dad before anyone else could speak. Him. My father-in-law showed up with half the county to intimidate me. Brooks didn't react. Who called us? Mike raised his hand. I did. Brooks recognized him instantly. Evening, Sheriff. Mike's fine these days. Brooks turned serious again. What happened? Ryan jumped in. My wife got emotional. Her dad overreacted. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was funny, but because emotional had become Ryan's favorite word anytime I disagreed with him. Late dinner, emotional. Questioning our finances, emotional. Asking him not to insult my father, emotional. Officer Grant walked me outside to her patrol car. The February air was cold enough that our breath showed. She didn't rush me. Can you tell me what happened? For the first time that night, I stopped protecting Ryan. He shoved me into the kitchen counter. Did he strike you? No. Did he grab you? Yes. Can I see your arm? I pulled back my sleeve. She examined the bruises carefully. When did this happen? About half an hour ago. She looked me in the eyes. Has anything like this happened before? The question sat between us. I wanted to say no. Instead, I remembered the moments I'd buried. Ryan squeezing my wrist at a restaurant until I couldn't hold my fork, slamming a bedroom door inches from my face, throwing my phone across the garage because I'd answered a work call during dinner. None of it had ever seemed big enough to report alone. Together, it looked very different. Yes. Thank you for being honest. Meanwhile, Brooks came out carrying a small evidence bag with the broken mug pieces inside. Body cameras running, he said. We're documenting everything. Ryan stepped onto the porch. This is ridiculous. Sir, I'd appreciate it if you stayed inside until we're finished. So now I'm the criminal? No one said that. This whole thing is because her father can't mind his own business. Dad finally spoke. My daughter's safety is my business. Ryan smirked. There you go again. Dad never took the bait. About 20 minutes later, Brooks came back to me. One of your neighbors has a ring camera facing your driveway. It appears the camera caught you grabbing Mrs. Carter near the front porch before both of you went inside. Ryan's face changed. That doesn't prove anything. No, Brooks agreed. It doesn't prove everything, but it proves more than you probably hoped. For the first time that night, Ryan looked nervous. Still, as I loaded my bag into Dad's truck, he forced a smile. You'll be back in a day or two. I closed the passenger door without answering. Pulling away, I glanced back through the rear window. Ryan stood in the driveway, arms crossed, shaking his head like he'd already convinced himself he'd won. He had no idea what frightened me most, wasn't that night. It was finally admitting to myself that the night wasn't the beginning. It had been building for years. Dad's house sat on 5 quiet acres outside Dover, 45 minutes away. White siding, a deep porch, wind chimes that only rang when the breeze came up from the creek. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into another version of myself. His yellow lab, Duke, rested his head on my knee as if he'd been waiting all along. Dad made grilled cheese, tomato soup, and warmed a slice of apple pie in the oven. Neither of us mentioned Ryan once during dinner. The silence wasn't awkward, it was healing. The next morning I drove to Fort Campbell instead of taking leave. Routine has a strange way of keeping you steady. I checked inventory reports, approved transportation requests, sat through a meeting that could have been an email. My phone buzzed constantly. 9 missed calls from Ryan, 7 texts, 1 voicemail. Emily, this has gone way too far. Tell your father to back off. I deleted it without listening again. At lunch, my closest friend, Major Lisa Henderson, found me sitting alone outside headquarters and handed me coffee. You okay? I've had better weeks. I've known you 15 years. You don't have to carry this alone. Those words almost broke me. I told her everything, not just that night, but years of little insults, the jokes, the way Ryan always found a reason to make my father look small. She listened without interrupting, then said simply, Emily, none of that sounds normal. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to deny. That afternoon I met family attorney Karen Whitmore, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, every bit the practical grandmother. After listening for nearly an hour, she folded her hands. No, I can't imagine how she realized. The fall at her hands would be so strong. He listened without interrupting, then said simply, Emily, none of that sounds normal. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it impossible to deny. That afternoon I met family attorney Karen Whitmore, gray hair, reading glasses on a chain, every bit the practical grandmother. I'd recommend filing for an order of protection. That feels serious. Emily, what happened to you was serious. I signed the paperwork with a shaking hand. Back at Dad's watching the sun disappear behind the trees, I told him I'd filed. He nodded once. I'm proud of you. I don't feel brave. You don't have to. After a long silence, he said, I need to tell you something. 8 years earlier, when Ryan interviewed for his security management job, he hadn't been the company's first choice. The owner had served with someone Dad knew, and they'd called to ask about Ryan's character. What did you tell them? Nothing. I told them I wasn't comfortable recommending someone I didn't fully trust. I sat there speechless. He'd never told me. Never tried to sabotage Ryan. He'd simply refused to lie. For years, Ryan had insisted he'd earned every promotion alone. Now I understood the quiet respect my father had built over decades hadn't disappeared. And those same people were about to learn what Ryan had done. The temporary order was granted 2 days later. Ryan was served at his Nashville office in front of coworkers. His face reportedly turned white. He called me 17 times. I answered once. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself. You didn't have to do this. It was years of arguments, Ryan, not one. You know I love you. I waited for something else. Nothing came, no apology, no accountability. I have to go. A week later, Karen called. Ryan had hired a lawyer and was contesting everything, claiming I was overreacting due to military stress. I stared out at Fort Campbell, soldiers hurrying across the lot, helicopters crossing the gray sky. Stress. I'd coordinated supply convoys through hurricanes, worked 18-hour shifts during flood relief, attended memorials for soldiers I knew. None of that had ever made me afraid to go home. Ryan had. That Sunday at church, Tom Alvarez pulled me aside. Ryan called me. He wanted a job. My eyebrows lifted. He said he was looking for options. I told him we weren't hiring. Dad stayed silent beside me. He also asked if I'd speak to some business owners he knows. What did you tell them? The truth. I've known Jack Dawson 30 years, and if Jack says his daughter needed protection, that's all I need to hear. Dad hadn't made a single phone call. People were simply making their own decisions. Ryan's world slowly began shrinking. A consulting client canceled. A meeting was postponed indefinitely. His name quietly disappeared from a leadership conference's speaker list. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just consequences. One evening on the porch, watching Duke chase squirrels, I admitted, I still miss him sometimes. Dad nodded. I hate that I do. You don't miss who he became, he said. You miss who you hoped he'd become. That hit harder than anything else, because he was right. I wasn't grieving the marriage I had. I was grieving the one I thought I could still save. The following Friday, Karen called again, wanting me to come in. Bank statements showed Ryan had transferred $83,400 out of our savings, nearly all of it, 3 weeks before the incident. 3 weeks before he ever shoved me, before the police, before I left. He hadn't acted in anger, he'd been planning. I felt the last piece of hope quietly disappear. I stopped wondering whether the marriage could be repaired, because it couldn't. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Dad was splitting firewood behind the barn when I brought out 2 mugs of coffee. You know you're 71, right? So I've been told. We sat on the tailgate of his old Ford, just listening. The creek, the birds, the wind, and the bare trees. I owe you an explanation, he finally said, for never telling you much about my Navy years. He led me to the detached garage to the old green footlocker I'd seen my whole life and always been told held old paperwork. Inside was a folded American flag, a Navy dress uniform sealed in plastic, photographs, deployment notebooks, challenge coins, a bronze star, a purple heart, everything wrapped and organized as if packed yesterday. In one photograph, Dad stood beside 3 young men, all smiling. Only 2 names were written on the back. They didn't come home, he said. The garage went silent. I used to think talking about those years honored them, he said. Later I realized living a decent life honored them more. So that's why you never told people. I didn't need strangers thanking me. I wanted my daughter to know how to fish, change a tire, balance a checkbook, and keep her word. I laughed through tears. You taught me all of those. I know. He reached into the locker again and handed me a folded sheet of yellow paper. 3 words were written across the top. Need you now. My breath caught. You kept it. I wrote it the day you left for college. You were 18. You told me if I ever truly needed you, I'd come. I always thought it was symbolic. Dad looked almost offended. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep. We both laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. Then he grew serious. I wasn't the bravest person in this family. What do you mean? I spent years overseas because I knew what the mission was. He looked directly at me. You stayed in a difficult marriage because you loved someone and hoped he'd become better. It takes courage to leave, too. I finally let myself cry. Not because my marriage had ended, but because I finally understood my father. His greatest achievement wasn't surviving dangerous missions. It was coming home and choosing, every single day, to become the father I needed. Neither of us noticed the black SUV slowing on the road outside. Ryan, watching. Dad found the tire tracks near the mailbox days later. A neighbor had recognized the SUV. Whatever it was, Dad said, he chose not to knock. 2 weeks later, we walked into the Montgomery County Courthouse in Clarksville. I'd sat through briefing rooms, command centers, emergency operations buildings. None had made me as nervous as that courtroom. Ryan was already there in a brand new suit, blue tie, fresh haircut, smiling a calculated smile. His attorney, David Mercer, whispered something that made him chuckle. Keep looking at me, Dad murmured. I don't want to look afraid. You won't. I feel afraid. Courage isn't the absence of fear. You really do have a saying for everything. I've had 71 years to collect them. Judge Eleanor Mitchell entered. Fair, direct, impossible to impress. Ryan's attorney rose immediately. My client deeply regrets a marital disagreement that has unfortunately been exaggerated. We believe stress has affected her perception of the incident. Karen objected, sustained. She called Officer Grant, who described the bruises and Ryan's behavior plainly. Then Officer Brooks, describing the broken mug, the chair, the body camera footage. Ryan grew visibly uncomfortable, but still seemed confident. Until Karen said 5 words. We'd like to play Exhibit 7. The lights dimmed. The Ring camera footage played, Ryan grabbing my arm near the porch before forcing me inside. The room went very quiet. Ryan's smile disappeared. Karen's final witness was Dad, in the same navy blazer he wore to church. Were you present the evening of February 14th? I was. What did you observe? My daughter had visible bruising. Did you threaten Mr. Carter? No. Did you strike him? No. Ryan's attorney tried a different angle. You've had military training. Wouldn't it be fair to say Mr. Carter found your presence intimidating? I can't speak for what another man feels. A few people in the courtroom smiled. You were once a Navy SEAL, correct? Many years ago. So you intentionally used that reputation to frighten my client. Dad answered with the same calm voice I'd heard my whole life. My client was my daughter. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked up from her notes. Ryan lowered his eyes to the table for the first time since we'd arrived, looking genuinely ashamed. Ryan's attorney made one last attempt. This was an isolated incident. Judge Mitchell removed her glasses. The court has reviewed photographs, medical records, officer testimony, body camera footage, text messages, and video evidence. This does not appear isolated. Ryan stood. Your Honor, may I say something? She nodded. He turned to me. Emily, I made a mistake. I never meant for any of this to happen. I waited. I've lost my job. There it was. Not I'm sorry I hurt you. Not I'm sorry I frightened you. The first thing he mentioned was losing his job. The judge noticed too. Mr. Carter, this hearing is about your conduct, not your employment. He sat back down. During the recess, Dad and I stood in the hallway. Do you think he'll ever understand? I asked. I don't know. I keep wondering if I missed something. You gave him years to change. I know. You didn't fail. Something unsettled in me. Finally settled. Someone else's choices, he said, aren't your burden to carry. 20 minutes later, the judge ruled the order of protection would become permanent for the maximum period. Ryan barred from direct contact except through attorneys, ordered to complete a certified anger management program, and financial transfers made immediately prior to separation would receive careful review during the division of assets. Karen squeezed my arm. The missing savings wouldn't disappear without questions. Ryan's shoulders slumped. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a man out of excuses. Outside, under a gray Tennessee sky, Ryan approached slowly, his attorney several steps behind. Emily, I'm sorry, I know saying it now doesn't fix anything. No, I said, it doesn't. He looked at Dad. I judged you. You did. I thought you were just… He couldn't finish. An old man, Dad finished for him. Strength isn't measured by how loudly someone talks. It's measured by how safely the people around them live. Ryan stood there without another word, then turned, walked to his car, and drove away. I watched until he disappeared into traffic. Not because I wanted him back, but because I finally understood that letting someone go can be its own kind of victory. People sometimes ask what happened after the courtroom. The truth is, nothing dramatic. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens one ordinary day after another. 6 months later, my divorce was finalized. Ryan was ordered to return a substantial portion of the transferred money. It took months of paperwork and hearings, but the truth caught up with him. I kept my Army career and accepted a promotion into regional logistics planning at Fort Campbell. For the first time in years, I drove to work without dreading going home. That alone felt like freedom. A few months later, I bought a small brick house less than 10 minutes from Dad's. 2 bedrooms, a front porch with a white rocking chair, a maple tree that turned bright red every October. It felt like a fresh start. Dad still refused to let me hire anyone to fix things. If you can coordinate supplies for a few thousand soldiers, you can learn to replace a kitchen faucet. Saturdays became our tradition: fishing at Kentucky Lake, breakfast at Cracker Barrel, laughing over candy at the old country store, or just sitting on his porch with coffee while Duke slept between us. Those quiet mornings became my favorite part of the week. One afternoon I noticed Dad carrying the old footlocker back into the garage. Locking it away again? It doesn't belong in the middle of the living room. Before closing the lid, he looked at the medals one last time. You know, these aren't the things I'm proudest of. What is? He didn't hesitate. You. I felt tears sting my eyes. Me? You built your own life. He closed the lid gently. You had the courage to rebuild it. That meant more to me than any award I'd ever received in the Army. A year later, Dad surprised everyone by joining the weekly veterans breakfast at a local diner in Dover. For decades, he'd quietly stayed away from those gatherings. Now he came home smiling, telling old stories, laughing over bad coffee. I think he was healing too. As for Ryan, I heard bits through mutual friends. He completed the court-ordered program, changed jobs twice. I honestly hope he found the help he needed, not because I wanted him back, but because I wouldn't wish that kind of anger on anyone else. If there's one lesson I've carried from all of this, it's that strength doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it wears a military uniform, sometimes it wears worn-out work boots and drives an old pickup truck, and sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever do is walk away from someone you once believed would never hurt you.